All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into, you guessed it, Roman history.
More specifically, Caesar's Gallic Wars.
Yep, we're going to be
Yeah.
dissecting this article. It's called Caesar's Gallic Wars, Battles and Strategy.
Yeah, tons of stuff in there.
Hopefully by the end, we'll all understand not just what happened, which is cool in itself, but why it still matters all these centuries later.
It's one of those things, you think Caesar, you think like all-powerful general.
Right.
But his Gallic campaigns, those were a real turning point. He wasn't starting from like a position of strength, you know what I mean?
Right.
It wasn't a given.
Yeah, and the article really paints a picture of him in 59 BC, consul, sure, but drowning in debt,
Oh, yeah.
facing some serious political enemies.
Yeah, up to his neck in it.
Not exactly the conquering hero image that usually comes to mind, right?
Yeah, not quite the statues we're used to.
So how does someone in that position end up in charge of all of Gaul?
Well, this is where Caesar's, I guess you could call it knack, for turning things to his advantage really comes in.
Okay.
He manages to secure the governorship of Gaul, and not just for a year or two, for 5 years.
5 years. Wow.
Now, even back then, that's a long time.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
It gave him this opportunity to build up a loyal army, but crucially, away from the watchful eyes of all his rivals back in Rome.
Okay, so he's got his own army now. But Gaul wasn't exactly, like, empty. What else did this control give him?
Oh, Gaul was like the place to be, at least if you were looking for resources. Wealthy region, perfect for Caesar, right? He gets access to this massive war chest right when he needs it most.
That's convenient.
But it wasn't just the money. Control of Gaul put Caesar right on the border of Roman territory, so perfectly positioned to expand their influence, if the opportunity arose.
So it sounds like, at least initially, he was more focused on consolidating his power and less on, all-out conquering.
Yeah, exactly. It was more about shoring things up, getting his ducks in a row. But as we'll see, things rarely go as planned, especially when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of migrating people.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of, the article dives into this huge migration of the Helvetii in 58 BC.
Oh, yeah, the Helvetii.
We're talking 368,000 people on the move.
Just like walking.
I can't even imagine the logistics of that.
It was insane.
What a nightmare.
Absolutely monumental undertaking. And for Rome, a real potential crisis.
Right.
You got to remember, these weren't just wanderers, They were headed straight towards Roman allied territories.
Oh, okay. That
Caesar couldn't just ignore that.
makes sense.
So he takes action. First, he destroys this bridge near Geneva. That was their main route, blocked.
Sure.
Then, and this is crazy, he builds a 30-kilometer embankment.
Oh, 30 kilometers. Was that even like a normal thing back then?
I mean, Roman engineering was something else,
Obviously.
Building that embankment, it wasn't just muscle, it was like calculated. It bought Caesar time to prepare his forces, and it sent a very clear message to the Helvetii. We are not messing around, you are not passing.
Power move.
Yeah, for sure.
So then we get the Battle of the Era, right? Where Caesar uses the Helvetii's vulnerable position as they're crossing a river to, well, attack. Surprise.
Oh, yeah.
Was that risky at all? Could have backfired? Or was he just that confident?
I mean, Caesar was known for calculated risks, right?
Okay.
In this case, though, he was exploiting a very real tactical advantage.
Yeah.
The Helvetii were all strung out, trying to cross, totally vulnerable. And Caesar, ever the opportunist, boom, seized the moment.
Yeah, took advantage.
Yeah.
All right, so that's one battle down. Then we have the Battle of Bibracte, which the article says is like the decisive encounter.
Oh, yeah, big one.
Can you walk us through how that one played out?
So Caesar never one to neglect logistics, right?
Okay.
He's busy resupplying his troops near the town of Bibracte.
Okay.
That's when the Helvetii approached.
Oh, so it wasn't like a planned meeting.
Not exactly.
Okay.
The Roman legions, famous for their discipline and formations, unleash this like barrage of javelins.
Javelins, classic.
Breaks the Helvetii shield wall, which is like their main defense. This was a tactic specifically designed to disrupt formations, create chaos, weaken them.
Brutal but effective.
Yeah, very Roman.
And it worked, it seems. The article says over 40,000 Helvetii casualties.
That's a lot.
You have to wonder, did any of their leaders, ever question this whole migration thing?
I mean, it's a staggering loss, right?
It really is.
Highlights the difference in military organization, discipline, all that.
Right.
The Helvetii, sure, formidable force, but ultimately outmatched.
Yeah.
The Romans were just too much.
So Caesar, at this point, you could say, had really solidified his control over Gaul, right? proven he could defend Roman interests, defeat a pretty major threat. But then a new challenge pops up.
A new one, yeah.
The Suebi, a Germanic tribe led by Ariovistus.
Ariovistus, yeah.
This is where things get even more interesting. How were the Suebi different from the Helvetii, like in terms of the threat they posed?
Well, the Suebes weren't just migrating. They were actively trying to carve out their own chunk of Gaul, you know? They were demanding land from Roman allies. Direct challenge to Caesar's authority.
Old move.
Yeah. And get this, Ariovistus had initially been declared a friend of Rome.
Oh, wow. What did that even mean back then? How did it change?
So friend of Rome, basically a title they gave to certain foreign leaders.
Okay.
It meant like alliances, trade agreements, military cooperation, even some political maneuvering, you know? But it wasn't a guarantee, right? Ariovistus, emboldened by his own strength, starts making unreasonable demands, rejects any attempts at negotiation, basically forces Caesar's hand.
So Caesar's got a whole new enemy now, with different motivations, probably different tactics too. How do you approach this new conflict? What's the article say about his prep?
Oh, Caesar was meticulous, as always. The article mentions him focusing on boosting morale among his troops, especially his prized 10th Legion.
Legion, yeah.
That loyalty, it wasn't just blind faith, though. Caesar cultivated it by, you know, sharing their hardships, leading from the front.
A leadership lesson for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. He also secured the town of Vesontio. It was strategic, made sure his supply lines were safe.
Okay, so even with a different enemy, logistics and planning still top priority.
Never changes.
It almost feels like Caesar was just bringing like Roman organization, Roman engineering to every aspect of war.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right, like that was their secret weapon.
He understood that victory wasn't just about fighting the battles, it was about controlling everything around them. You know, making sure troops are supplied, motivated, a real holistic approach.
Right, like a whole system.
Exactly.
Okay, we've got the stage set, both sides ready. The question is, how did this clash play out? Caesar versus Ariovistus.
That's the million-dollar question, right?
That's what we'll dive into next, the tactics, the challenges, and the outcome of Caesar's confrontation with the Suebi.
Yeah, that's where we really see Caesar adapt to a new kind of enemy, a new kind of warfare. So the Sue, these guys, they weren't like the Helvetii, you know.
Right. Different approach.
Yeah, they went after the Roman supply lines, disrupted them, and their fighting style, whoa, talk about a mix. Cavalry and infantry, all coordinated, like what we'd call combined arms today.
Combined arms, is that, why was that so hard to counter for, you know, someone not up on their military history?
Imagine you're a Roman legionary, used to facing infantry, nice formations, all that. Suddenly you got fast cavalry on your flanks, disrupting everything, and oh yeah, infantry's still pushing at you. It was chaos. Caesar's legions had to adapt, big time.
So had the Romans ever dealt with that kind of fighting before?
Not really. And the article even says they had some early setbacks, like they got hit hard. This wasn't a walk in the park for Caesar. Really tested him, tested the legions.
Makes the eventual victory even more impressive.
Yeah.
Like winning when it's tough, that's the real deal.
Exactly. This is where Roman training, discipline, all that, it paid off. They fortified their positions, changed formations on the fly to counter the cavalry and the infantry all at once. This wasn't just a mob. This was a professional army.
Thinking on their feet.
Oh, yeah, battlefield smarts.
Which, I mean, that's got to be valuable, right? Back then, even today.
Oh, absolutely. Caesar's victories in Gaul, yeah, they show his leadership, no doubt, but also just how good the Roman army was. Adaptable, disciplined, tough to beat.
Speaking of leadership, the article specifically mentions the loyalty of his 10th Legion. What was so special about them?
The 10th, they were known for, like, insane courage, total loyalty to Caesar, but he earned it, you know? He inspired them, led from the front, shared the danger, all that, built trust. It wasn't just about barking orders. It was about showing them, being there with them.
Leading by example. Classic.
Yeah, they were a real team.
So we've got Caesar, the brilliant strategist, and then these incredibly disciplined legions, adaptable, tough. Sounds like a recipe for success, right?
Hard to argue with that.
But it wasn't just about tactics on the battlefield, right? I mean, these victories, they changed things big time.
Oh, huge. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, those weren't isolated events. They shifted the whole course of history, both for Rome and Europe.
Let's talk big picture then.
Yeah.
How did these campaigns, like, reshape the map of Europe, literally?
Well, first things first, Roman territory just exploded. Caesar's wins, they brought tons of Gaul under Roman control. push their boundaries way out north and west. That's the foundation for what becomes Roman Gaul, a vital province for the whole Roman Empire later on.
So he wasn't just winning battles, he was redrawing borders. What kind of long-term effects did that have on the region?
Oh man, it was like a domino effect, geopolitically speaking. Conquering Gaul, it expanded Roman influence, sure, but also it kind of ended that constant threat of tribal migrations and attacks, pushing into Roman territory. He built a buffer zone, a shield for Rome's heartland.
Protection. And I mean, for the people living in Gaul, what did Roman rule mean for them?
Well, it led to what we call Romanization. Over time, their laws, language, culture, all that, it spread throughout Gaul. Huge impact shaped the region for centuries. In a lot of ways, what we think of as Western European civilization, Caesar's victories laid the groundwork for it.
Wild to think about. Something from so long ago still affecting us today. You can see those Roman echoes all over Europe.
It's everywhere. And that's why understanding history is so important. It's not just dates and names, it's about the forces that made our world the way it is.
So far, we've been focused on the successes, the strategies, the effectiveness of the Roman army. But, I mean, the article doesn't shy away from the human cost either, right?
Yeah.
We're talking thousands, tens of thousands who died in these battles.
Yeah, it's important to remember that these victories, they weren't bloodless. Behind all the brilliance, the maneuvers, real people fighting, dying, whole communities were disrupted, families torn apart. You can't forget that part of it.
It's heavy stuff. Easy to get caught up in the big story, but gotta remember the individuals whose lives were changed forever because of it.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things I take away from studying history. It's not just about empires and generals. It's about the human experience, the good and the bad, the triumphs and tragedies all mixed together. It's what makes it real.
We've covered a lot today. Caesar's rise, his strategies, the Roman legions, the impact of those victories in Gaul. But there's still one big question, I think, hanging over all this.
What's that?
What if? What if Caesar hadn't been so successful? What if things went differently? The Helvetii broke through, Ariovistus wins. How does history change?
Yeah, that's the kind of question that keeps historians up at night, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's like a giant choose your own adventure, but like empire level stakes.
High stakes.
Every decision, every battle could send things down a totally different path.
Yeah.
So what are some of the possibilities? If Caesar, if he wasn't so successful in Gaul, what happens?
Well, it's all speculation, obviously. Yeah. But Gaul, it might have stayed this like patchwork of independent tribes, right?
Wow.
Vulnerable to invasion from, I don't know, other powers, who knows? Yeah, who knows?
And the Roman Republic, they wouldn't have had Gaul's resources, that strategic depth. Their future could have been completely different.
How so?
Maybe less stable, right? More internal problems, maybe even open to invasion from, well, the same tribes Caesar defeated. Irony, right?
Yeah, that's a big what if. It really shows how important these campaigns were. It wasn't just like Caesar's ambition, it affected everything. Western civilization, the whole thing.
No doubt. It makes you think about the individuals, too, What if the Helvetii, what if they had a different leader? Someone who could have, really united them against Caesar.
Interesting.
Or Ariovistus, right? What if he was a better diplomat? Maybe he could have built a stronger alliance against Rome.
Yeah.
History's full of these what ifs, and each one is like a little window into a world that could have been.
Totally. It's like those, what are they called? Those sliding doors moments in movies?
Yeah.
One little change, everything's different.
Yeah.
But here, we're talking about empires, the whole course of history. Kind of blows your mind.
Yeah, it's big stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of what makes history so interesting.
Right. It's not just facts and dates.
No, it's a story full of twists and turns, real people making choices that had huge consequences. We're still living with those consequences today.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Caesar's Gallic Wars, what are some of the, I guess, the big takeaways you think our listeners should, walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest one is that even stuff that seems like ancient history, it can still affect us today,
Totally.
Caesar's victories, they weren't just about conquest. They shaped the political landscape, the cultural landscape of Europe for centuries. We're talking lasting impact.
It's a reminder that history, it's not just old stories. It's the foundation for everything. Understanding it helps us make sense of, well, everything.
Exactly. And it shows the power of leadership, adaptability, strategic thinking. Caesar wasn't just a general. He was a leader who saw the big picture, adapted when he needed to, inspired his people to do incredible things. Those are qualities that never go out of style. You know what I mean?
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We've marched through battles, analyzed strategies, and yeah, maybe pondered a few too many what-ifs. But hopefully you've come away with a better understanding of Caesar's Gallic Wars and just how much they changed the world.
It's been a great journey. And, keep exploring this period of history on your own. There's always more to learn, more stories to discover, and yeah, more lessons to be learned from the past. It never gets old.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of, well, who knows, history, science, whatever catches our attention.